Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Story Driven podcast. Today, we've got a great episode with Dr. Kalpana Sundar. Honestly, I feel that this episode is for anyone out there who feels maybe that they've put others before themselves, the approval of whether it be parents, teachers, peers, specifically when choosing your career path. For anyone who feels that maybe they still haven't truly found themselves yet and are still looking and searching. And for anyone who's ever felt that they've had to suppress their voice, I think Dr. Kalpana's story will resonate with any women out there who felt constricted by the constructs of society that society places on women. So I'm very excited to take a deep dive into Dr. Kalpana's story today, from her experience as a physician and surgeon in the medical industry to transitioning out and getting out of ultimately a place she felt wasn't truly aligned with who she was and her actual passions that she had suppressed for so long, to now being a badass woman speaker, author of actually this book right here. I've got it, Beauty Unbound. Great book, coach for women, and who has now become a very close friend of mine as well. I feel that her story is a testament to no matter where you are in life, no matter what age, no matter how long or how stuck you feel in a certain career, it's really never too late to find yourself and to make a big change and to find your voice. Here we are at Dr. Kalpana's home, your new San Diego home with your puppy Enzo by my side. And just want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And apparently my dog likes you more than me right now.
She's the sweetest dog. But we got to meet each other. That was back in October at the RPXP retreat. And blossomed into a friendship first and foremost, and then working together. And it's been a pleasure and an honor getting to know you and being a friend. And I just can't wait to dive into your story.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to meet you too and get to know you. It's funny how, my whole brand is about, unusual concepts like being unbound. And, there's even with your age and my age gap, it's like funny how many levels we can still connect on. And I think sometimes people don't even realize that. It's
true. I can't tell you how many people I don't see age. I don't see things like that. So it always astonishes me when I'll hear people say, maybe for example, there were these really cool guys I met in Europe. And they were telling me all about how they went fishing and how cool it was to go fishing. They're like, one day you have to go fishing. I was like, why don't we go fishing? And for some reason, it threw them off. They were like, well, we're older. They were talking about how they were professors at this university, but we were hitting it off and having this awesome conversation. I was like, I don't see any of that. I just see you guys are cool dudes we could be friends. But I just see, there's these misconceptions and these predetermined ways of society that can be really annoying.
And that's what I'm all about. It's why do we listen to that? Why don't we just do what speaks to us and what feels right? Because it's not every person there's an age difference that I get along with, but you're definitely mature for your age and you're definitely somebody I can relate to probably even better than some of my own peers. So why would we let that stop a friendship, right? I mean, it's just silly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's awesome to get to meet. I feel that, the majority of clients and friends I end up working together with and collaborating with ends up being really open-minded individuals. And I'd say that you are one of the most open-minded people I've had the pleasure to meet.
Thank you.
Probably in my life. I think anyone who has gone on the journey that you have, and I think after hearing your journey, I feel like they should teach, your journey should be taught to kids in school, because honestly, they don't teach this kind of stuff in school. They don't teach what is your purpose? How do you find that? And how do you make sure that the vocation that you get into, your career path, like how do you make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons? Mm-hmm. And so like they're not teaching this type of stuff, like how to live a fulfilling life, mm-hmm. how to, find your passions. And this is through hearing your story. Both the highs as well as the lows and the dangers of mm-hmm. going into the wrong field for the wrong reasons. Not just the emotional and, mental devastation, but even the physical ailments and sickness that can come from going down that wrong path. I'm so happy that you are telling your story so courageously, so fearlessly, and taking something that went, was a sour lemon and turning it into something that is now your why and your purpose. And I think that's so inspiring.
First, I have to say thank you for acknowledging that. It is, but I think we go through things in life and you have to almost make that lemonade out of those lemons. I mean, otherwise you're just miserable. And that's what I realized. I thought, you know what? If I can turn this into something good, then it doesn't feel so bad. And that was where it started. And just because of that, I just kept going with it. So every bad thing and then I'm going to reframe that because I don't like to call things good or bad. But let's just say what people consider good or bad. Now I just consider them learning experiences. And then I just turn that around and think, how can I make this easier for other people? Because I struggled with this, and this. And now I can hopefully make it a little easier when people go through some of these challenges in their lives. And again, these challenges are not good or bad, like I said, but I just believe that they're meant to help us grow. We have two choices. We can either grow from them or we can be taken out by them. And I just made the choice that I'm just going to keep growing from them. And not to say that I'm hoping that all the big ones are behind me. I've kind of had enough for right now. But, nevertheless, if I'm supposed to grow from something else, I will accept the challenges I need to.
Well, that brings to mind a quote I remember hearing, that life will teach you the lessons you need to learn mm-hmm. with the lightest tickle of a feather or with the smash of a sledgehammer, depending on how much you're willing to adapt and grow, how open-minded you are versus how resistant you are to it. And that's something that I feel that once you've gotten to that place of open-mindedness, like for me, there was a point in my life where I was like, I know everything. I'm a young 20-year-old. I've got my own video agency now. I'm on top of the world. I'm invincible. Mm-hmm. And then that's where life will come in and humble you. Mm-hmm. And that'll be, I went through some really hard times and really dark times. It was also where I can relate to your story as well. Mm-hmm. It's just like some really tough moments. And I've always found that the darkest times were always like just before that. What predicated those times were typically times where I was the most rigid, the most unwilling to learn a new lesson. And so then, the sledgehammer would come. Mm-hmm. And I like to think that now that we've got to that point where we have become like commensurate students of life and we're more open-minded, hopefully that's where, now we won't have to deal with the
sledgehammer.
The sledgehammer.
We can just get tickled with a feather and we're like, okay, we need to learn something. So please don't bring the damn sledgehammer.
Yeah, exactly. But for you, I'd say there was I would love to bring it all the way back so we can, really take us on that journey of, even all the way back to your childhood. I'd love to hear about how, the plot points in the story, those defining moments that put you on that path toward becoming a doctor, becoming mm-hmm. a surgeon, and ultimately going into a marriage and a whole life that at a certain point you realize like this life that wasn't for you.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because when I look back, I would say that I can look really far back at how things have affected me. So I was born in India and I came here when I was 10 months old. So one of the challenges that I faced early on was just learning how to straddle between these two cultures. I had these parents who really wanted me to be very traditional Indian. But then they brought me to America, and I'm trying to fit in with these people. But so I almost led a double life. I'd be one way in my American life, and then I'd come home and try to be this wonderfully, obedient, Indian girl. And it was really, really hard to do that because I could never be authentically myself. So on one end, I was completely rebellious and doing things I probably didn't even care to do. But my whole goal was to be rebellious against what my parents were forcing me to be. And then I go home and play the dutiful child and, this and that. So that was already tough from the beginning. And again, I also grew up in New York for a little while, then we moved to New Jersey. But by the time we moved to Florida, I was about 11 years old. And, everybody it was a town that didn't have a lot of diversity. So I was one of the very few Indian people there. So that just made things a little bit tougher for me. I was like, okay, now I really don't know how to fit in. So I think I always tried to fit in my whole life, and that's the recurring theme. And when I was a kid, my parents, of course, when you're Indian, you are either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. You've got three choices, okay? So you're going to pick between one of those. Naturally, I was good at math and science, so I was supposed to be a doctor. But it all started when I was 5 years old. And one day I told my father, because he was sick. And of course, when you're a child and you see your father really sick, you're worried. And I said, Daddy, I'm going to be a doctor one day and I'm going to help you and I'm going to help a lot of other people. And it was funny in that moment, even though I was so young, I saw what happened to him when I said those words. I mean, it was this approval that he felt, and this, all of a sudden I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt valued in a way that I didn't feel before, because I was a little bit of a troublemaker and mischievous. I mean, those things still are true. So because of that, sometimes I had some battles with my parents. I would always be the one doing the thing they didn't want me to do. So once I saw that approval in his eyes, I said, oh, okay. And then I started to up the ante a little bit more. And one day I wrote a paper about the heart in the 4th grade, and I came home and I got a good grade on it. I showed it to my dad. And then I said, you know what, Dad? I think I'll just be a cardiothoracic surgeon. And he's like, his face got even more excited and more animated. And I could just see, oh, wow, more approval. Like, this is what I'm after. Because growing up, my father was very unaffectionate, I guess is the best way to put it. So it was through those methods that I could gain his affection. So then it was like a Pavlov's dog response, I'm like, okay, what more can I tell him now that he's going to be even more happy to have me as his daughter? And it just kind of went through that pattern. So I did become a surgeon. Granted, I didn't become a cardiothoracic surgeon, but I was an ENT surgeon. And just the idea of having a daughter as a surgeon, I mean, it just boded really well. Now, granted, it wasn't just to please him. I tend to be that kind of person anyway, because I like extreme things. So surgery, race car driving, martial arts, these things are all very, very related. So I can't say it was out of my personality, but there were things I didn't consider that would affect me. So naturally, I just go through the path of medical school. They're beating you down. They're just, you're taught. I mean, they break you. I guess that's the best way to say it. They break you like the military breaks you. And I didn't know that going in. Nobody told me that. Nobody expressed that to me. I had no clue. I also did not know that my life was never going to be my own, ever. I mean, I thought my life is not my own during medical school, residency. But then I thought I'd get into practice and I have a life. And I have a life with, that I have money, I have the freedom, and I have a real life. No, you never really have a real life, because now you're on call. You're always bound to this pager, beeper, or phone. There's always some worry in the back of your mind where you're never really free. Well, nobody told me all that stuff. And I didn't know that I could continue doing that because there was no reprieve at the end. How do you get out of this? Then you're faced with, if you want to leave, how do you leave? Because now you're a couple $100,000 in debt. How are you going to pay that back? So it's really just I really felt like I got boxed into some sort of corner and I had no idea how to get out. And then there are no resources for physicians who want to take a different path. And there's nothing available to show you how to get out of that spot. So it's just tough.
Oh yeah.
And I wish somebody had told me all that. I mean, again, maybe I still would have done it, but at least I would have understood. They paint the picture like this is an amazing life that you're going to have. You're going to have all this prestige and knowledge, and you're going to be making lots of money. And at the end of the day, really, you're not really making that much money. Not to give up your life. It's not enough money to give up your life. So these are just the things that I didn't know. And I just went down a path that was prescribed for me in some ways, and just found it wasn't right for me. It didn't really fit my personality.
Were there ever any signs as you were a kid, things that you maybe, signs that appeared toward the stuff that you actually cared about that you unfortunately maybe ignored because you felt that those weren't going to get that same approval?
Definitely. So when I was a kid, I loved running for class president and all those things. And I remember a couple of times when I ran for class president, I would come up with these really creative speeches. And I'd memorize them, and I didn't have to. Nobody else was doing that. So I wrote up a speech, maybe a 5-minute little speech, and then I was really creative, and I was really proud of it. And every time I gave a talk, and the whole class gets up and they're clapping because they really enjoyed it. And I thought, this is really cool. Like, I really like this. And unlike everybody else, I wasn't scared to get up there and do these little speeches. I enjoyed it. So that was my first hint of, maybe this is something I would enjoy. But again, I didn't know at that point that could even translate into anything career-wise. I just didn't know enough. I wasn't aware enough. I'm about, maybe 9-10 years old. And then I remember one year, I think I was 10, and we went on a field trip in New York City, and it was to a station, and none of the kids wanted to go. They just were annoyed. They wanted to go do something fun, like go to Central Park. And I was like strangely a little intrigued by this. I'm like, I don't know, this might be kind of cool. So it was a big line of us, and I don't know how many kids I even had in the class, but we went there, and I did my thing, and they gave us something to read, and they filmed us, and everybody looks very uncomfortable while they're being filmed. And then there's me. I get up there, I read my thing, I'm calm, cool, collected, and I'm like, oh, that was fun. And that's not the way everybody else felt. And I'm like, what? I don't understand. I was so confused. But I loved it. And when it was time to watch myself back on the camera, I was like, this is cool. Maybe I could do this for work. And then I thought, how's that going to go? I'm going to go home and tell my parents that, no, I'm not going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. I want to do something on TV. I was like, this is not going to go well. So I didn't say anything. That was the end of that. And then it's funny how years later that urge came back. Probably 25 years later, something like that. Mm-hmm. Because, we just hide these things and we bury them, but they have a way of resurfacing. Mm. Everything we bury resurfaces, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh man, there's some big truth there. Yeah, I would say that I really relate, just like resonate to the part of your story where, there was this feeling of, wow, there's something here that I have that, it's like, it doesn't feel like work, to everyone else, it feels like work. For me, like that was film class. For me, it was like getting in film class. All the other kids were kind of like, falling asleep during the movies and stuff like that. But I would be like, always constantly like, this doesn't feel like homework. This is fun. And that's a great place to, when you feel that, to like, okay, like let's keep digging into that. What does that mean? But I would say, yeah, if I didn't have the support of my parents, if I didn't feel like they would still have affection for me, love me, which sadly, that's, some parents, they just were never taught. They were never taught, like, to them, of course they love you.
Oh, yeah.
Of course they love you. But specifically on certain parenting styles of how the priorities become about, controlling the kid's life more than letting them be free and then explore their passions. That's, to me, that's tragic. That's when that happens. And it could lead to, in your case, a lot of suppression of your own voice, of your own. So I'd like to explore that, like, because it sounds like that was one of those early behaviors that, and having talked to you before about your story, that really became like a repeating cyclical pattern that sort of further down the line started to create some of these sledgehammer moments that we spoke of. And so, yeah, like, you know, going into, okay, like medical school, maybe we can get into some of that. You know, how did you deal with this and cope with this knowing deep down? Was it always there since you were applying through high school, getting into college? Was it always there's sort of knowing that this wasn't really what you wanted?
I would say yes. I mean, I wanted it, but for the wrong reasons. I mean, I wanted it because it was a way to prove myself to the world or whatever that was. It was some ego-driven reasons why I wanted it. But at the core of it, I started medical school and people would tell me, some of the doctors would tell me how tough it is being a doctor. And I was like, well, it's fine. You know, I'll ride the wave for however long I want to. I go, because this is just my first career. And I would say this, and I was 20-something years old. I didn't have a clue what my second career was. I hadn't even gotten into the first one. But I go, that's fine. It's my second, it'll be my first career. And how did I even know that? It was just like I was saying things. I didn't even know what I meant by them, but I was just saying them.
Sounds like you were already ready, though, for that second career.
Right. I was ready for the second career before I started the first one.
Yeah.
So, medical school was very difficult. Because one of the things I recognized was I didn't really fit in even with my peers. So I had a great group of friends, and you know, I back then, you know, there were more men in the class than women, so I have a really great group of guy friends. But it's funny because as I watch what's happened, they loved talking about medicine. So after we took some big exams where we'd all study together, we all got to be really, really good friends, and I was the only girl in the group. But I was more of a tomboy, so I think I just fit in better with them. And when we'd go out and, you know, party after our exams, they still wanted to talk about medicine, and I didn't. And that was my first clue of there's some disconnect here, because these guys still want to talk about this, and I'm like, please, let's talk about anything but this. And fast forward, you know, we get together every couple of years because we have to do some CMEs, and we usually meet in Miami. That's where we all went to medical school in Lauderdale. And even then, like when we're socializing, they want to talk about their patients, this or this thing that they saw, that thing. They don't want to talk about other things. And I am like, I'm so over this. To the point where I actually don't even want to go this year. I'm going to do it virtual because I don't care to talk about that stuff with them anymore. And I've just gotten so disconnected from people who do that anymore, because to me, it's like, and I'm just calling people out on this, but it's a mask. It's a mask to hide your true self. They're hiding behind this ego of being a doctor. Without that, they don't even know if they know who they are. I know I didn't, and I'm not saying anything negative. It's just that some people want to take off the mask. I ripped mine off, all of the ones that I was wearing, and just said, you know what, this is who I am. Either take it or leave it, but I can't hide behind these weird personas anymore that are not me. So I think that was when I first started to realize, but then I got further along, and surgery was awesome. Like, that was better for me, because then I was amongst some people that were kind of similar in a lot of ways, you know, just kind of hardcore, and just surgeons are funny because they're really hardcore and they're very meticulous, but they joke around in the OR. We're, you know, having funny jokes, and, you know, it gets to the point where surgery becomes very routine to you, that you're doing your surgery, you're obviously paying attention, but you can also have conversations. When you start to get that good at stuff, you're having conversations. And we joke in the OR and just like crass humor, and that part was awesome. So I did enjoy the surgical aspects of it and everything. But then I would say that, you know, I've definitely faced a lot of challenges, because during surgical residency, they train you to ignore your body and what it needs. So basically, if you need to eat, they train you to ignore it. You need to pee, they train you to ignore it. I can't tell you how many UTIs I wound up having just from not being able to pee, not being able to drink water and things like that. So living in a state of dehydration, hunger, lack of sleep. I mean, I was a mess. And I was pregnant during residency. Then I got to a point where I really couldn't ignore things, because now there's a child that's depending on me. So I had to pay more attention, but I really couldn't pay that much attention. So I had preterm. I went into labor early both times because of that. Oh my gosh. So that was a whole challenge in and of itself. So, you know, it really is it's a difficult field for a woman. I don't think it's any easier, to be honest with you. I've talked to women even now, and it's a lot of the same. They just feel like they have to break you. And then I don't understand, because why is this profession that is about taking care of other human beings destroying the ones that are taking care of the other human beings. Do you think you can actually be compassionate after that? You can't. I mean, you could pretend to be, but you kind of just see them as not human beings after a while, because you cannot pour out of an empty cup, as I know now, and you're expected to take care of people with compassion when your cup is empty, when you haven't slept, when you haven't eaten, when you haven't seen your family, when you haven't done all these things. How does that even work? It really doesn't.
Wow.
So I came out of residency feeling like a freaking robot. I was militant. I was obnoxious. Had the whole surgeon persona thing going on. Like, it was not pretty. And
Wow.
I'm glad I don't even resonate with that human being anymore.
I feel like that is so eye-opening and emblematic of a very broken system.
Mm-hmm.
The more I find out about the healthcare industry, like, breaks my heart for the people who are on every end of it, like every side of it.
Mm-hmm.
It really comes down to that. I think that you hit a nerve there when you mentioned you can't care for these people. And it got to the point where, we had during 2020, we had some stuff that happened with my family that was kind of hard to talk about, but we ended up in and out of the hospitals right around the time COVID was just breaking out, for other reasons other than COVID. But it was like we were in and out of these ERs, and it just, very much felt like these people don't care about us. Mm-mm. And sadly, it's like, it's not even their fault. It's like the system that's broken and creating this numb emptiness from, that if you don't feel like you're being cared for, taken care of, then that's just like, it's a scary, I think it's a scary reality that leads to a lot of tragedy, in my life, just seeing how even that the medical, the pharmaceutical industries have the havoc they've wreaked. I don't know if we got into this, but like my little brother's autism, he was diagnosed when he was 2 years old, but at 1.5, he was developing totally normally. 2 years old, and it's like, I'm not like someone who's like against specific medications or things like that. Like I feel like there's a lot of people are helped. A lot of people are helped and taken care of by things like insulin and things that are absolutely needed and necessary. On the other hand, there's the exploitation. There's the how much, okay, like now we're going to, because these people need this, we're going to completely just gouge them and rip them off. With my parents and my family scenario, though, what came down to was they wanted, probably for cost effective reasons, they wanted to just do all the vaccines like in one big round on my brother. I think it was like 1 or 2 big rounds. And so like around, just before he turned 2, he got he got vaccinated. And right after that, my parents saw just a completely his behaviors just fell off a cliff. His development totally stagnated, started zoning out where he used to be present. Start zoning out. And so it's like this system that I think that you really hit a nerve there of where that source, maybe where that a lot of that starts.
And we don't know how vaccines affect different people. I mean, yes, I would say the grand majority of people are fine, but I've heard many stories like this, and I think we have to open our ears and actually listen and stop thinking people are just crazy. I'm sure my colleagues hearing this would be like, she's lost it now. She's like going, but I'm starting to see things from a different viewpoint, because at one point in my medical practice, the veil got lifted for me, and I started to see what they were making me do that I didn't agree with. So there are protocols. They're called standards of care. And, you are, to not get sued, you have to follow the standard of care. And that goes against what you may actually think is best for that patient. So that already started to bother me. Not that I'm not willing to look at the standard of care and use it as a guide, but they will dictate to you, if you see a patient with a sinus infection, they need 4 weeks of antibiotics before they can get a CAT scan. Well, what if I don't think they have an infection? What if there's an obstruction? What if there's polyps? What if there's something else? And no infection. that exists. You can have some blockage without an infection. So why should that patient have the antibiotics for 4 weeks? There are repercussions of that. So then you start to look at some of these things, and then you see who they're funded by. And then it all starts to make sense. And I'm like, okay. And it's fine. I mean, I'm not saying that everything is bad. I'm just saying they're just things that we have to look at and identify and just make decisions on what's right for each person, because it's not a one size fits all. And that's what I think it's kind of becoming. And then over the years, what I noticed is that I really liked getting to know people. I mean, I'm one of those deep dive people. Like, either you know me on a deep level or you don't know me at all, because I don't do superficial things. So, and in that same way, when the patients came in, about, oh, Mr. Smith, how are you? Oh my God. So your daughter got married last year. Even if I hadn't seen him in a year, I'd remember that his daughter got married. How was the wedding? Like, I loved that stuff. Well, it got to the point where I couldn't spend that time with them, because it was like, to keep my lights on, I had to see this many patients, so then it took the joy out of it. So there was a lot of joy in it before, and that joy was balanced with the things that were not so joyful. And then one day it tipped, because all the joy was removed. EMR came about, and now I'm like documenting things in the computer, and I can't look at my patient. I've got to look at the computer, and I've got to be very efficient. So I've got to kind of do it while I'm in the room. And now I feel like I'm losing that interaction that I desperately craved and enjoyed. And now it's being replaced with this computer, et cetera. So it got to the point where I was like, I'm not really enjoying this at all anymore. And all of it just seems like a pain in the butt.
So take me to that point. I've heard the term inflection point. For me, I look back at a few inflection points in my life that also happen to be rock bottoms. Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes it has to get to that point where it gets that painful for us to really make a change. What would you say was your rock bottom moment?
I would wake up and I wish I was dead. I was like, and I was like, I can't think this way. I mean, I have a family, I have a husband, I have 2 children. But every day I'd wake up and I was like, I wasn't going to actively do anything about it, but I just was like, well, if I just died, it'd be great. I'd be out of my loans. I don't have anything to worry about, and I don't have to do this anymore. And that's when I knew things were really bad. And it got to a point where I was just depressed, and I just had no time for myself. I had no time to breathe. My head was always cluttered with something. And I would wake up at 5 a.m. and I'd rush off to the hospital, do rounds, get to the office, work on charts, see patients, more charts, deal with employee stuff, deal with practice administration stuff, blah, blah, blah. Get home, then I've got kids and this, that. I mean, granted, I'm lucky I wasn't a single parent, but still, there was a lot that was still put on me. And it felt overwhelming. And I didn't know how else to get out. And so I was like just passively wishing that maybe I should just die, and that I was like, come on, at that point, I already had a near-death experience, so I almost died. So the fact that I wanted to go back to that was not a good sign. So that's when I knew something really had to change. And I also realized that I was living my life like a sprint, like sprinting towards retirement. And my goal was to retire at 50. And I was like, and then I realized later that it wasn't even to retire at 50, it was to get out of medicine by 50, which I accomplished at 51. So, and then here I am starting a whole new career because I have no desire to stop working. I just had every desire to stop doing that.
Oh, man. Well, congratulations.
Yes.
On The Great Escape.
The Great Escape.
Yes.
That should be my next book, The Great Escape.
Yeah, I want to get into your first book and all that. But man, I really want to stay there. And, I really want to get to the bottom of okay, you're at that rock bottom and you were feeling like you just didn't want to be here. What were the steps? Walk me through, like, how did you start to get out of that mentality, the mindset, to the point where you were able to leave and you were able to start correcting that, start moving towards the path you're on now?
So I did some soul searching, and one thing I recognized that I was too present in my practice. So the first step I made was to hire a nurse practitioner so that I could have like a little more time, so I can maybe spend a little more time on the administrative tasks, not have to be in the office every day, just do some things that I needed to get done. So I started to take I stopped working 5 days a week because really I worked on the weekends. It wasn't just the time I was in the office. There was a lot of other time there. So I felt like at least 2 days not going into the office would be beneficial. I can, administrate from home, and I had office managers. So I felt like that was fine. So I started doing that, gave me a little more space. But you know what I found out? The more space I took, the more space I wanted. I would have thought it was going to go the other way, that I was like, I got a break and I was going to go back. And I was like, yes, this is great. No, I never felt like that. I was like, no, I really want more time off. And then eventually I started to feel like I just really don't ever want to go back. So that was a problem too. I still liked doing the surgery. I have to say that was the thing that was probably the hardest to leave because I enjoyed it. It felt like, I don't know, that was kind of my happy space. I mean, my hands are just like kind of in this rhythm, and you're making people better with using your hands. Like I liked that part of it. And I liked talking to patients, but there was just so much that got to be very icky for me, and it was time. So I knew that I needed more space. So then I realized that I had a cash-based practice within my medical spa. So that was around the time when I was like, maybe I'll just create a freestanding medical spa, just do a cash-based business and, not worry about the insurance. Because at the end of the day, I was like, the insurance is making me super miserable. And patients are nastier when they have to deal with insurance too. My cash paying patients were fine paying cash for their cosmetic procedures. And then if they had a $10 copay, they were like, I can't believe I have a $10 copay. But then on the flip side, I had two businesses. On one side of the office was ENT, the other side was the cosmetic practice. Meanwhile, they're like, you're going to tell them it's this amount to get this and this done. And they're like, oh, yeah. So when can you do it? I'm like, well, next week. And they're like, okay, I'll pay you now. And I just want to make sure I secure my appointment. So I'm like, wow, these are two very different beasts. And on this end, people are happy. And this end, people are always complaining and always mad. And I was like, well, I think I don't feel like dealing with that aspect of it anymore. So that was the plan, to kind of, transition out, have the, I was still overseeing the ENT stuff and had well-trained nurse practitioners and everything. So I was comfortable with that. And it was still in the building, so it was just kind of facilitating everything. So that was kind of the general game plan. But I also had, it was hard because there were just some things that, and not to call out anybody, but I think people get used to something that they bought into. So I was married at the time, and he wasn't as open to me changing my career. Not because he wasn't supportive, but I think he just didn't have the foresight to see what else I would do. Which I didn't really know what else I would do either, but I think I'm a little better at figuring things out, and some people are not so much good at that. So I think he couldn't see it. And, so we really had a lot of disconnect over that because I wanted to leave medicine, and then I didn't feel like I was being supportive. And so then I was like, okay, so now I have a really big decision to make. And plus also I was feeling like I was going in a different direction anyway, altogether. Like it just didn't feel compatible to me anymore. And, he's a great guy. He was a great father to the kids. And, we're still actually very good friends. We actually had a conversation yesterday, and I could be on the phone with him for 45 minutes, and it's very pleasant. He's a really great human being, but we just don't see eye to eye on things. He's a little, I would say it's funny. They say that you marry your father. I didn't think that I did, but he's very much like my father.
Yeah, the practicality.
The practicality.
The pragmatism around.
Exactly. Like, this is what you're trained to do. Just keep doing it. Like, I don't understand. My father says the same things. Yeah. And so it's interesting that it's so true. But again, it really was a good partnership for a very large part of my life because, as far as teamwork and taking care of our kids, we still do a phenomenal job at that. But I just felt my life going in some different direction. I wasn't sure what it was, but I didn't feel that or sense that he was going to be on board with it.
So I'm curious because it sounds like right around this time, is this part of the journey where you found out about the diagnosis? Because I'm curious.
Oh, the cancer diagnosis?
When that came into play.
So that was actually a lot earlier.
Yeah, because I definitely want to make sure don't want to make sure we miss that because.
So let's tie that into where we are with this because it did tie in. So I was literally right out of residency, and I had started my practice. I think I was 4 months into my practice, and things were booming and going great, like to the point where I was like, I need a bigger space already. Like, I'm so successful, like I'm awesome, like feeling all the good ego driven, things that you feel. And then one day I'm like doing my charts, and I don't know, physicians and surgeons, we're weird. We do self-examinations on ourselves whenever we're thinking about things. So I'm sitting there and I'm like feeling my neck and whatever, because I do neck exams on everybody else. I'm just feeling my neck and like just doing my charts, whatever. And I'm like, wait, what is that? So I felt something and I'm like, it's a thyroid nodule. I mean, I know what it is. This is what I do all day long. And I was like, where did that come from? I mean, I check my neck pretty frequently, but I don't remember that being there. So I was like, crap. So I was like, all right, okay, I don't want to make any decisions on what to do. I know what to do. So I call my colleague, right? Because like, I really know what to do, but I have to call him anyway. I don't know why. It was the dumbest thing. And he's like, oh, it's probably nothing. I wouldn't even worry about it. It's what he tells me. And my gut's telling me, no, don't listen to that. So I'm like, no, I need a biopsy and an ultrasound. So I write my own script for schedule my own ultrasound and, get it. And it's a solitary nodule. Solitary nodules have a greater incidence of cancer, especially in that either in your early 30s or like extremes of age. So those are the risk factors. And it was about 1 centimeter and it was a solitary nodule. I'm like, crap. And, I just had a bad feeling. I was like, I know this is something bad. So then I try to do like my own biopsy in the mirror. That was a whole thing. I have my medical assistant standing there. I'm in the mirror holding it, trying to stick a needle in my neck. And I'm like, just stand here in case anything weird happens. And she's looking at me like, why I don't think I signed up for this. This wasn't part of the job description.
I've heard of like doing like hair, like your own haircuts, but I don't know. This is another level.
Oh yeah. Physicians are weird. I mean, I've injected myself with Botox filler. I've done all of it because I don't trust anybody else to do it.
Wow.
It was a point where I didn't trust anybody else to do it. Now I actually feel like it's better if somebody else does it because it's real hard to get the right angles in the mirror. But there I was trying to get it, and I did it, but I didn't get enough cells. So then I had to go for an ultrasound guided biopsy, and I had one of my colleagues do it, and we got the cells. And it was funny. I knew it was bad. Like as soon as, and a lot of times with pathology reports, we joke because pathologists are never direct. They're like, it could be this, and it could be that, and it could be that, or it could be that. That's how a pathology report usually reads. Mine was like papillary thyroid cancer. I was like, well, there's no messing around with that one. So then I get on the phone. I mean, I have to say, I feel very blessed that I was in the field, that I could get all my care coordinated. Then I call my colleague. I refer my thyroid, like my major thyroid surgeries, I would refer to him, like the ones that were more complicated. So I was like, who would I trust more than him? So I get on the phone and I call him. He's like, oh, hey, how are you? I'm like, John, how are you? I was like, I got a patient for you. He's like, oh, yeah, tell me what's up. I was like, it's me. And he's like, what? And he's like, what's going on? It's like, papillary thyroid cancer. I got a 1 centimeter solitary thyroid nodule left side. And he's like, all right, we'll get you in. So get in, go do the whole pre-op thing. And then he does the surgery, and I'm like not nervous at all because I trust this guy completely. I mean, I've sent all my patients to him, so I know he's a great surgeon. Well, the surgeries are typically like, his usually like 2 hours, give or take. I'm in there for like 3.5 hours. My husband's like freaking out, like, what happened? And then I wake up out of anesthesia and he's like, Kalpana, count to 10. And I'm like, oh crap, what happened? Because I think he wants me to talk. And because the nerve for your voice box is right behind the thyroid gland.
Shit. So
I was like, and I'm like groggy and I don't answer right away. He's like, count to 10. He's like sounding nervous. I'm like, okay, I better say something. So I count to 10. He's like, thank God. I hear him and I'm like, oh. So then I pass out again because you're awake from anesthesia. You're kind of groggy. And then in the recovery room, I see him again. And he says, well, there was tumor right on your nerve, right on the vocal cord nerve. So these nerves are teeny, teeny, tiny. We monitored them during surgery. He goes, I had to take the scalpel. He goes, I didn't want to leave tumor in there. He goes, that's not a good idea. So he goes, I stripped the tumor off your nerve with the scalpel. I was like, of all people, thank God I went to this guy. I mean, so my voice was a little weak for a while, but everything is fine now, obviously. And so anyway, that all happened. And then I go, and you're supposed to be monitored in the hospital for, some time because you can also have your calcium drop. And my calcium was a little borderline that night. And then I just want to go home. I'm like tired of being in the hospital and I want to go home and I just want to be home. So the next morning, he's like, well, your calcium is borderline, so we want to watch you for more night. I'm like, John, listen, I'm an ENT. And So I'm arguing with him. I was like, so I know what happens. I know what to watch for. I will go get my labs done first thing in the morning and everything's going to be fine. And like reluctantly, he's like, fine, I'll discharge you. Right. So I go home. I'm home. I'm happy, right? I wake up early in the morning. Like I was going to go for labs, and there's something called Shavastic sign. I wake up and my fingers are tingling, and I'm like, oh, this is bad, because I know that's a sign of hypocalcemia. So I get to the mirror and I check and I tap on my face, and it like jerks, like it contracts, and that's a sign of pretty significant hypocalcemia. And, my kids were little at the time. So my husband was getting everybody ready because we were going to go to the, you just can't leave them there. You got to like do the whole rigmarole. And I was like, we got to go to the hospital. And he's like, well, I'm getting them ready. I was like, there's no getting anybody ready. I need to go now. Luckily, my husband drives really fast and really crazy. So he got me to the ER really fast, driving down the highway. I'm like, whatever, if we get pulled over, it's going to be okay. I'm in the car and I'm like, and my last name was different at the time. So I was like, this is doctor. And I was like, I need an amp of calcium gluconate ready for me when I get to the ER. And I'm like, I know I don't sound like myself because I sounded like a stroke victim because I was like my voice wasn't coming out right. My muscles were contracting. And I was like, oh my God, thank God we're not that far away. We get to the ER and it is under construction. So there's like a whole like maze of how to get in there. And my husband's like, I don't know what to do. I was like, just grab a wheelchair. And I was like, no, I think there were no wheelchairs. I walked in because I was like, I knew where to go. And I was so determined and my legs weren't straight. Like I was like, look, like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And we left the kids in the car, the two, like 1 and 4. And with the security guard. So, it's an emergency because that's not the kind of person I am, But I was like, can you watch them?
Yeah.
Literally.
Oh
Like, watch the kids
Straight
in
out
the
of a movie.
watch the kids.
Just hobbling into
exactly.
the ER.
Watch the kids in the car while I go to the ER. So I walk in, they know me. So this guy had, then there was a nurse I knew. He was one of my favorite nurses. He had that IV in me in 2 seconds. Wow. And it was like, like my muscles were not contracting, and I was like, okay, so I'm gonna live, thank God.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask, like, what, like, if you hadn't gotten in there as fast, like, what you would have died, and like,
totally.
And how?
My calcium was really pretty low.
I was gonna say, like, how,
I probably had maybe another half hour.
Oh my God.
I mean, yeah.
Jeez.
And think about it, like, if I didn't know how to save I called in the order ahead of time, and if everything hadn't worked out so great, I mean, I'm grateful because I'm still here. So how this ties in that moment, I had so many regrets about my life. I couldn't even name them all. I didn't live. I didn't have a chance to live. I didn't tell everybody I loved them. Not everybody knew how I felt about them. I was like, I don't know. I had just gone through a medical surgical residency. Like I was out of touch with everybody because I was in my own world, and I couldn't watch my kids grow up. I mean, oh my God, the list of regrets was so long. And then as I was saying before about just things that you bury have a way of resurfacing, I just buried all that. I was like, oh, I got to get back to work. I got crap to do. And so whatever, like I almost died, but we're just going to ignore all that and just shove it under the rug and just go on with life as normal. And that's what I did. So about 10 years later, I started waking up in the middle of the night for no reason, like somebody had their hands around my neck. And every night I would just jump up out of a dead sleep. And I was like, something is wrong with me. And that was when I started to realize that I never processed a near-death experience. I never processed anything that happened to me. And I just went on as if it was all okay and nothing was really okay. I was just basically dying on the inside while putting on a really big show that my life was fantastic. I was like, I got the big house, I got the great cars, I've got all these wonderful things, and my life is perfect. I've got the kids, I've got the husband, like everything's great. And meanwhile, inside, everything is not great. So that was around when I had the revelation something needed to change, but I couldn't sort out all of what it was. I started going to therapy. I started to really take a little more time for myself and kind of sort some things out.
So at that point, you still hadn't maybe made that connection, because I'm curious, like specifically having gone through cancer, not just yourself, but also your son. Mm-hmm. What were those, maybe some signs, like I've heard something like there's only 3% of the U.S. healthcare budget goes towards prevention. And that's scary because it's like this stuff happens. And I feel like we've almost been just sort of conditioned as a society to be like, well, that was just going to, you were just going to get cancer and then they'll look at genetics or things like that. And it's like, was it genetics or was there a specific lifestyle? Was there, like you just mentioned, was there something that could have been prevented that you feel?
So I led a reasonably healthy lifestyle. I mean, I'm healthier now. I probably didn't exercise as much back then just because I was so busy. But, we don't account for how much stress has to do with it. We don't account for how much our emotional well-being may play a role in it. So interestingly enough, with my cancer, and I'm sure my medical colleagues will just call me a quack and a crazy person. But, there's a lot we know in Eastern medicine, and Eastern medicine and particularly Ayurvedic medicine, they talk a lot about the chakras. And it was interesting because I didn't even know what the hell that was. But probably around that time where I was having that kind of awakening of something's not right and there's more to life than this, et cetera, we had gone on a family vacation to Asheville, North Carolina, where, and I talk about him in my book. I met an artist by the name of Jonas Gerard, and he was an older man and he was hoarse. And I asked him, I said, I'm an ENT. And we got to talking. I said, what happened? Like, did you have something that happened? And he goes, yeah, I had vocal cord cancer. And I was like, oh my goodness. He goes, yeah, I don't even smoke. And I was like, oh, I know there are people who deal with vocal cord cancer who don't smoke. And he goes, well, I believe it's because my fifth chakra is blocked. And I go, what is he talking about? And I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, I was living with a woman who didn't allow me to express my truth. I was painting things that were not my truth, and I was not speaking my truth. And that's all in your fifth chakra. And I'm like, well, that resonates with me a lot because I've never really spoken my truth. I don't even think I'm living my truth. And I'm also with somebody who's not allowing me to say my truth because they're kind of like, well, this is what you're doing. Keep doing it. Then he showed me these paintings that he had done, and they were very traditional and very boring, really. And he was doing well. But, he said, but this isn't my truth. And if you look at his work, it is colorful, movement, abstract, wild, passionate. It looks like his soul's on fire when he's painting. And it's just, he has beautiful, beautiful work. So he just passed away a few years ago. And I actually I have a dedication in my book to him. Because that man changed my life. I don't know if he knew it, but he did. He got me to think about something I never thought about before. And that started this spiritual awakening for me. I was like, what is a chakra? Then I started doing all this research. And I'm like, wow. So to the point where I actually have it. I have a tattoo of a lotus and the chakras around it, that because it was such a significant moment in my life. And at that moment, I just realized that I'm not really living my truth. I'm not speaking my truth. I don't know what that looks like, but that's what I got to go for. That's the goal here. And so that started the journey.
This was after the jumping out of bed, holding your throat, and then it was around like that time. It was around that time you found the answers you were looking for.
Yeah, I was probably in my early 40s at that time. So I still wasn't ready to do anything, but I started doing some little things towards, finding my truth. So interestingly enough, it was after that I started to do more speaking engagements, and I'd have like some of the pharma companies wanted to hire me to speak, et cetera, et cetera. And I love speaking. So I would always take opportunities to do that. I started doing TV. I got this random opportunity that was, what was it called? My Strange Addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
So I get something in the office and my girls in the office are like, you need to do this. I'm like, what is this? I go, I don't even know what this show is. They're like, oh my God, it's the greatest show. You got to do it. You got to do it. So it was something about an ear. Somebody was digging in their ear. They wanted a doctor to, do the show with.
Wow.
So I'm like, well, fine, I'll do it. I just got to get these guys off my back. They're not going to lay. I was like, whatever. It's an opportunity to be on TV. It'll be fun. So they came in, they filmed on a Saturday and they're like, have you ever been on TV before? They're like, you're a natural. And I was like, no. I was like, they're like, but you're not even afraid in front of the camera. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I don't know. So I was like, So after that, then all of a sudden, more opportunities started to come. It was like the news called me and they wanted to do a segment on something. And then I started to regularly appear on a couple of the Jacksonville radio news stations and stuff. And I was like, this is really fun. I really like this. It was like that made my whole week. If I knew I was going to be on TV that week, I'm like, this is awesome. This is a great week.
Do you feel like you were consciously manifesting those things, or it was sort of just after you had set a target in your
retrospect? Yes, probably, but I don't think I didn't know what manifesting was at that point. So I didn't make these connections. It just started to happen, and I loved it. And then I thought, what if I just could have my own TV show? That'd be amazing. I remember thinking that. And I've been saying this for something like 20 years. My son reminded me that I've been saying it since he was about 10. So he's 25. So 15 years at least I've been saying something like that. So yeah, I guess I was probably manifesting it, but didn't realize it.
So going back to now, there's the marriage and realizing that's not really your truth. Mm-hmm. So what did that look like? Like having built this entire life, this, I think for me, looking back on those moments, the scariest moments from my, the big pivots that I made away from, I wanted to be a film director and I was in the film industry and I was, grinding in the PA route and I was a PA for, months and months. But like leaving that, there was like this idea, it was almost like leaving wasn't as scary as the idea of people thinking that, oh, he gave up. Mm-hmm. Or, oh, he couldn't stick it out. Oh, he quit. He's a quitter, loser, whatever. Like, it's almost like those opinions held as much weight, if not more weight, than the fear of jumping into the unknown that was going to be entrepreneurship for me.
Right.
I'm curious, maybe like let's go back to like, you had a beautiful, you had the sports cars, you had the end, like that life that people would envy. Go, oh, look at that person. They're a surgeon. They've got everything together. They've got it all figured out. How did, starting to push towards your truth after meeting this man, and he tells you about the chakras, like, what was that transition like?
I think all of a sudden I knew that there was something in my gut that's been telling me something needed to change, but I couldn't explain it. So the problem with our society today, we always need our head to explain stuff that our gut and our hearts already know. And I didn't really know. I went out with my girlfriend one night. I go, how do you know when you want a divorce? And she's like, you just know, is what she said. And I thought, because she had just been through a divorce. So that's why I asked her. And I said, I think I know, but it's like, I can't explain why. I mean, society has to put everything in a box that people can understand. So if you get a divorce, you have to do it for certain reasons. Somebody's cheating, somebody's a gambler, somebody's a drug addict, or they're beating you. And none of those things were true. And this is a perfectly good guy. So why on earth do you want to divorce him? And I'm like, I didn't really have an answer for that. I just knew that I had to find me. And there are certain dynamics that take shape within a relationship that after 27 years are hard to change. That's all I knew. I just knew I couldn't figure me out within the confines of that relationship. And you know what? For me, that was good enough. And, people tell you don't break up your families. It messes up kids. I mean, society is very short-sighted in their little prescriptions for people, because none of that crap is true. Because on the other end of it, I'm not saying it was easy to go through a divorce from somebody that I was with for 27 years. I am even getting choked up thinking about it, because when I talk to him, I still feel so much love and gratitude, and just, that'll never change. I mean, he's the father of my children. He was the first person that I loved. I spent my life with. I thought we'd be together forever. Like you could hear in my voice. I just still feel all those ways about him. And so it was hard, but I knew that I had a greater destiny to fulfill, and I didn't think that our paths were going in the same way. So I think I knew that, but I couldn't explain that at the time. So, none of these things were making any sense. So society will tell you that you get a divorce and you have to hate each other, you break up families, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? I still have a family. It just doesn't look traditional. I'm just not married to my kid's father. Do I have a family? Are we still a family? Oh, yeah. Is there something going on with our kids? He and I talk. We figure it out. We're a family.
Wow.
I still talk to his family. His parents are still my parents. I was married to him for 27 years, and we were part of each other's lives for 27 years. When we got divorced, they said, you're still our daughter. That will never change. And I was like, great, because I still think you're my parents and I don't want them to change. I still talk to them all the time. We've been divorced over 6 years. They are my family. So, and then as far as my children, that it destroys your children. You know what destroys your kids? When you fight, when you talk nasty about each other, when you hate each other. That's what destroys your children, not the divorce. It's the way you handle that divorce. And I've seen that case in point because I'm not saying we were perfect. We had some tough times in the beginning, but these kids are fine. They know that their parents care for each other. They know they like each other. They know that we care for them. They're fine.
Yeah. And it, to me, it sounds like that's something that I look back on my childhood and like the times my parents fought, those like just like those memories are like, yeah, trauma, but I look at really like the love that your parents or that you exemplified for your kids in having that relationship and showing, just because you don't have a label attached to it, just because you're not doing something the way that society, but you still led by example of like, this is what love is. You can still love someone and not have to have this attachment to them. I love that.
And what is the greater love? To hold him back from the life he wants to live and me back from the life I want to live, or to let each other go and still love each other in the way that we do? Because I know that hasn't changed. I mean, we'll always care very deeply for one another. But and we could have figured it out. We probably could have compromised, and we'd done that. But he wanted a whole different life than I wanted. And one was right for him and one's right for me. So what is the greater love? Society defines love as what? Attachment, ownership, labels. I don't think that's what love is. I think love is the ability to care for somebody so deeply that you let them take on whatever path that's best for them, even if it's with somebody else. That's unconditional love.
I more recently have been thinking about, okay, there's unconditional love, and how does that look in our interpersonal relationships? But then what I've been thinking more about recently has been this concept that honestly, like, I feel like society is just barely discovering this idea of like self-love. There is the self. And it's like, I think, just it's in the last 10, 20 years, people have just become conscious that there is your thoughts. And then there's the consciousness behind your thoughts. There is the observer. Well, I know that goes way back into ancient, Eastern practices and meditation and the, that, but it feels that very much in this Western society that people are just waking up to that.
Right.
I'm curious, your take. So the divorce, right? And then it's like there's this moment where you get to find yourself. Like, walk me through that. Finding yourself, finding that self-love that you write about in your book.
So I would say it started with Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. Because, these concepts were, like I said, they were kind of foreign to me. And, again, I was like, shocker, what is that? Soul, I knew what it was, like, theoretically, but didn't really understand it. I read that book, and it was the start of the change of my life. And I started getting kind of very addicted to understanding more about spirituality and this and that. And I think that kind of started to surface within me. And I was like, now I need to be with somebody that shares those viewpoints, and understands that. And so that was just part of my journey that I had to take. So, it's been a journey because there's so many things I've had to work through. I've had so many attachments that I've had to work through. At the end of the day, that's really what my journey has been about, is having so many attachments to so many things. And I've read that it's not, our greatest miseries are brought about by our attachments. And it's funny how free you feel when you're not actually attached to anything. You can like things, you can want them in your life, but the reality is that we've not been taught as a society that nothing is forever. Things come, things go. And if you just look at it like that, you feel a little more peace about when something is time for it to go. You just, okay, you let it go because maybe something else is supposed to come back in its place.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big journey for me, is learning how not to be attached to that title, the ego, the job, the career, the status, the money, all of that. I just feel like when it's time to let those things go, I just let them go.
I'm curious how you get to that point where some people in my life, who I obviously won't name, but some people I know, seem stuck in a place of
I want you to name them.
status. Yeah.
Go ahead, name all of them. No, I'm kidding.
So, so anyways, this is why people hate writers or creators.
Exactly.
It's like, I see a lot of people like this. People I'll meet, people I could just see it in their face.
Mm-hmm.
They're very unhappy. They're stuck, and it's like there's this status that for you maybe it was being a doctor, being known as a surgeon, and specifically in our Western society, and they don't have this over. If you go to Europe and you ask someone, about themselves, they're not gonna say, "Oh, I'm a, doctor."
Right.
Even if they are, they're gonna be like, "Oh, I like going on long walks. I've got a dog." It's like they're gonna tell you about them and who they are. But for some reason over here, like returning to America, I started to realize, like, man, people are really, really, really obsessed over here. Like the car you drive, the job, the title. It's like people are almost like when they ask you,
because they want to put you in a box.
Yeah. People ask me, tell me about yourself, and I'll go into something. And they'll go, it's like they don't even care about that. And then as soon as I'm done talking, they'll go, but what do you do? Okay, so then I'll tell them, and it's like they're doing this. Like, where are you on this totem pole? Where am I? And it's like.
All
Dude,
ego-driven stuff.
This ego-driven stuff is just so...
And they want to put you in a box so they know where you belong. And I'm like, well, we don't belong in boxes. We just don't. So the reality... And it's funny, I was actually telling somebody this the other day. I don't feel like I've seen that as much in San Diego, or at least in the group that I'm around. I was at a party a couple of weeks ago. I don't think a single person asked me what I did. Yeah. I got to actually know this, but I don't even know what they do.
Well, that's called finding your people.
Yeah.
And there are those groups.
Yeah. I was like,
everywhere.
How in the world did I stay at this party and I don't even know what they do? They didn't mention it. And nobody really talked to me a whole lot about what I do, but actually knew who they were. And that's just a great scenario. But yeah, I think there's a lot in society that we're focused on. What do they do? I always hated that. I always hated that question because I'm not what I do. And what I do could change. Because as it has, and it probably will continue to change. But who I am also never really changes. I just think we're busy. I think who we are never really changes. It's just we're busy putting on masks to present ourselves in different ways, to hide who we really are because we're so busy trying to conform and fit in to be accepted. I mean, that's just a basic human need to want to feel accepted. Yeah. I mean, I came all the way, I moved across the country because I found my tribe. And I was like, that's it. These are the people. That I feel the most comfortable around.
It's a much different feeling, this feeling of truly feeling accepted by a community, by a people who just love you for who you are, all unconditionally, your flaws, everything. Like, to me, that's where, with how we met through John and Monsi and their community that they're building with the Abundant Tribe leaders. Like, what a community of, it's like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do.
Right. Or your quirks or your imperfections.
Your title, your status.
It's great.
It's like, what do you care about? What are your values?
Right.
Are you a good, like, are you a judgmental person? Because if not, like, okay, that's not our vibe. And those communities that I've found where it's like this truly non-judgmental, unconditional love, I'm like, this is it. This is where I start to feel God's presence. I'm like, that's God. Whoa.
Right.
What the heck?
I've never felt so accepted in my life. And that's the one thing I felt here. And again, can I quantify, qualify? Can I even explain it? Probably not. I mean, I go back and I'm like, I'm moving to California. People are like, oh. I mean, actually, the interesting thing is my real close friends were very supportive. They were like, we could see that. But other people are like, why are you moving to California? They got taxes there. I'm like, yeah. They also got a lot of great things there, like people that I really can resonate with. And I have felt more at home here than I ever have anywhere else. And I've only been here. I haven't even been here 2 months. And it's funny how I have so many great things to do. I have so many great people to hang around with, because it's like every time I meet somebody, they feel like part of my soul tribe. Whereas, you know, in other places I've met a lot of people, but don't really resonate with them all that well.
So yeah, I mean, you know, now that we're here, we've reached the present. There's still so much to your story that I like want to talk about. You know, you race cars, you do Krav Maga.
Yeah,
I don't know how to say it.
Everybody
but
says that. Everybody says Krav Maga.
Yeah, and, like I've always wanted to get into mixed martial arts, but like you're doing it, like, so that's inspiring. I want to get into some of that. Maybe you could teach me a few moves.
I think all of that kind of resonates back into the I don't want to fit in any kind of mold. So again, when people see me, they're like, "Oh my God, she's little and she's cute," and like, "Oh my God, like she's just gonna." And then this voice comes out, and they're like, "We didn't expect that." So I think I like to surprise people, and I've always been a bit of a tomboy. I mean, on one end, I like all the girly things. I like to dress up. I like purses. I like shoes. I like all that stuff. I like shopping. I like being a girly girl, but then on the flip side, I'm doing martial arts and I'm racing cars and I'm like totally the other, side of things. And again, I think it just goes back to like, I don't want to be put in a box. I want to do what I want. And I like all those things because they are parts of me. We all have parts of our personality that I think some parts that we easily accept because they're acceptable to everybody else. And then there's our shadow side that we're not so willing to let everybody see. And I think part of my journey has been about letting that shadow side out. Little by little, those things come out because I am a little bit more aggressive and I have that rage. So how am I going to express that rage in a socially acceptable way? Krav Maga works, because now I'm actually fighting and doing things that we're not hurting each other, but it just allows me to get that out, and I love it. And it's great self-defense and has gotten me extremely fit, so I love all that. And then on the flip side of things, like, I have so many aspects to my personality, and we all have those facets. It's just that I think sometimes we're not as comfortable expressing parts of it. So for example, I guess you could say that I'm more comfortable expressing my masculine side. So here's the interesting thing. I'm less comfortable expressing my feminine side, my vulnerability. Those are the things I've had to work on over the years. And now I'm capable of being more emotional, vulnerable. I mean, you can ask my kids. I was militant when they were younger. Oh. And they actually told me, they're like, "You're way more nurturing now than you used to be." Because I didn't know how to do that. I mean, I was in a masculine, male-dominated profession. I was very comfortable expressing my masculine side. And I think men have the opposite problem. Like sometimes they are more comfortable expressing their, or the same thing. They have easier time expressing their masculine side, less their feminine. So irrelevant of your gender, I think we all have something that's a little harder for us to express. Mm-hmm. It's not gender-based. It's probably just maybe our circumstances. I don't know.
Well, I think it ties back to that voice, like using our voice, being who we are, not being afraid to be judged. I think that, there was that it was like this irony to the fact that there was that lack of using your voice, of saying, going after what you wanted in your career. And then there was the thyroid cancer that arose. And then we didn't really even get into how when your son got diagnosed and what that was like.
Yeah. And so, I had a son also who had a health issue. And I mean, that was just devastating, and it's just, I think for me, that stuff was about learning to deal with one challenge after another. It was around that time in my life. It was right after COVID. It was this health challenge that he had. I had a business that I had to close because of COVID. It was just one thing after another. And I think that whole part of my life was about dealing with attachments. And the thing with my son, I think, was about really expressing my vulnerability. I mean, that was the single most event. I think that was the biggest event in showing me to be more vulnerable. Like, I think he saw a side of me that he'd never seen. I saw him look at me like, I had no idea you cared that much. Of course I do. I'm his mother. I gave birth to him. But I wasn't showing that. And so it was a real wake-up call for me to express that more. And now it's like a much softer side of me that they see. And I get along so much better with them because of that. Because they're seeing that feminine mom side. I just didn't know. I didn't have it to give, to be honest with you. I just didn't have the self-care to be able to give that to them. And now I do.
Yeah.
Now I make sure my bucket's always full so I can pour at any time, that I have plenty to give them. I'll always make sure I take care of myself, because at any given time, if one of my kids needs me or my friends need me or somebody needs me, I have it to give.
What I love about your story is it really exemplifies how just much of a range and like a dynamic situation self-love truly is, like self-care. It's not just, oh, go to the gym and you're
right.
It's like, no, like what is your day-to-day like, and are you actually enjoying it?
Mm-hmm.
Are you in a field where you feel like your work is purposeful and you can like go to sleep at the end of the day and be like satisfied? Obviously not every day is gonna be the happiest day ever,
No.
but it's like, are you happy with the ethical like implications of what you're doing? And so from going from the ER rooms or the EMT like surgery field, and then like through that journey of seeing you're part of something that you're just not truly, it's not something that you can die happy and look back and go, like, I think that's a big indicator,
Yeah. And for some people, they would die happy just doing that. Just for me, I just wanted to impact the world in a different way. And I always knew that. I just didn't understand what that way was. And then through my story and through my struggles, I started to understand, women started to come up to me and start to share certain things. And I've always had this way with people that they would tell me things that they wouldn't tell other people for whatever reason. Even in my medical practice, that would happen. But then I started saying my story, and women would always say, I just got chills. This is inspiring. And I thought, why is it that every woman I talk to is saying this? Like, I feel like this is a sign. And then I was like, well, if my story is that inspiring, maybe I need to share more of it. And that was when it all came unraveled for me. That I was like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to help women with their struggles that they don't tell anybody else about. They're all facing them. And it's funny, even now, as I talk about my story, how many women resonate with it, but they haven't told anybody else that they're facing these struggles. And I don't want that to be the case. I want women to start speaking up about what they're facing, what they're going through, not be stuck in this pretend world that they're living in, and just be able to express their truth, stand in their own power, get what they want out of life. Because at the end of the day, what I truly feel will happen is that there will be more harmony in the world as each woman starts to take charge of her life. Because what happens is women also, because of societal expectations, they really, I didn't do this as much, probably just because I had more of that masculine aspect to me, but women will be in this martyr state that they feel like they have to serve everybody and they don't matter at all. And I always tell women, I say, what does that teach your daughter? What is that showing her? To do the same thing? Is that what you want her to do? That she doesn't matter and everybody else does? And immediately the women say, no, that's not what I want to show my daughter. Well, that's what you are showing your daughter. And then I say to them, what about your sons? Are you now showing your sons that women don't matter? And it's funny how when you put it in that frame, all of a sudden women don't want to be showing their kids that. But they do it, and we're going to model. Your kids are going to see what you do, so they're going to watch that. So I started to realize that there's really a disconnect with this, and women don't feel okay nurturing themselves, taking care of themselves, because they don't realize how much it impacts negatively, how it negatively impacts the rest of the people that they're aligned with, their family, their children, their spouses, their parents, their friendships, the work that they do. If you take a fulfilled woman and you look at her life, it's a lot different than the unfulfilled woman. And I know that firsthand because my mother was one of those people that literally put everyone first. And I knew that didn't serve her, but she also was traditional Indian. This is what you did. And I think that's why I didn't do it. I was always kind of like, I'm not going to do anything she did. I'm going to do the opposite. So it was already coming from that place. But I think that I saw how much it didn't serve her. And until her last day, she just never really expressed herself. And I felt like I didn't even know her. So how is that different for me if she was fulfilled? How would that have impacted our relationship in a more positive way? it would have impacted every one of her relationships in a more positive way. So it's not selfish, but this is what society does. This is what society tells us, and I feel it's a form of control.
I feel very much that there's a lot of forms of control out there that are, the media, these narratives that are put out by the corporations and the big, we can go down that rabbit hole, but I see the effect. I see people around me unhappy, negative, very much, like just experiencing the fallout in their relationships from their careers, or living this unfulfilled life. And the beauty of your story is I feel that it doesn't just tell, it shows. It really does demonstrate, like here's what it looks like to live out of alignment. I mean, to the point where you can get cancer, like to the point where you can get sick over it, and like both mentally, but even physically. Like, to me, there's a very important cautionary tale in your story, but then to see the overcoming. You've written a book, Beauty Unbound. You've now begun impacting the lives of other women, your friends, now moving into coaching and leading, and that's where I see you as a true leader, because you were leading by example. You're going out, kicking ass, literally, taking names. And that's just, you're just really, really like one of the coolest people I know. And
thank you.
It's a pleasure to be friends with you. And I want to hear, what would you say to the woman who's out there hearing this and then thinking, that all sounds great, but there's like this, there's one thing hearing it, right? Easier said than done. Like, what would you tell that person who maybe is listening to this podcast right now and feeling like that all sounds great, but I don't know if I can do that, or I don't know if it's for me?
That's a great question.
Maybe some takeaways, some actionable, like what is some action that even could be taken today, tomorrow, to just get started? Because I really do feel that getting started is like one of the most
it is
biggest hurdles.
It's not an easy journey, so it's not for the faint of heart. I would say that. So I think that, one thing to really understand, that I don't ever say that any of this was easy. Is it worth it? Yeah. But was it easy? Oh God, it's the hardest journey I've ever been through in my life. I mean, it really has been difficult. But I've also learned things to make it easier that I think I can really help other women through it, to make it easier for them. So that's part of my goal in this world, is like, let's show you how not to make the 579 mistakes that I made in each part of my path. And, instead of it taking you 6 years to get on track, hopefully it'll be a lot faster, because you can take the benefits of all the things that I did wrong. So I would say that, number one, it's about taking space to breathe and be quiet. That's number one, because you got to figure out what it is that you really want. And I think everything has to start from that, to really, but to look at it that way, you have to have some space and some quiet time. So the first actionable step would be to just get a little more quiet time in your life, where you're not constantly running and taking care of other people, more self-care. It's a journey, so it's not something that happens overnight. But I think that as long as you start noticing that there's quiet time, often the second step of the path will reveal itself. Just because I'd love to write a prescription, but it's not a one-size-fits-all prescription. So everybody's situations, circumstances are different. Some people have to go about it in a totally different way based on their life circumstances. So I think that the most important thing is to stop, reflect, get some space, quiet time, allow the next step to unfold. And I really think coaching is a big part of it, to be honest with you. I wish I had somebody that could coach me through this, but it wasn't even such a big thing when I was going through it, so I didn't even know where to find that. And then I think especially for physicians, it's very difficult, because we're so attached to our identity that it's really hard to figure out what you would do beyond this, because there's very few non-clinical physician jobs out there. So it's really like, what do I do? How do I make money? What am I going to do? And it's really a hard thing. So I think coaching is huge. And I also think that looking at your attachments in life, that's where my whole concept of unbound comes from. Just not being bound to where you're to certain things. And for typically women, or everybody really, it's a couple of things we're always bound to, like what our family thinks, like our parents, our immediate family, our primary relationship, spouse, significant other, how it impacts our children. Then there's finances. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of guilt that we feel. There's a lot of shame that we feel. Society also tells you shouldn't quit, which is another thing that you were talking about. But the reality is, I think we can quit. If something doesn't serve us, it's okay to quit. It just has to be a conscious decision. Listen, I can keep doing medicine. I could have kept doing it. But it just wasn't serving me, so why should I?
Well, I think that if you would have kept doing medicine, the question that comes up for me is, would that have been, because you said, well, it's not for the faint of heart, right? Going after and going after your dreams and going after a fulfilled life. But my question is it easier? Is it harder than staying down that path that wasn't serving you?
I don't think so, because I think I knew I couldn't do that anymore. I just knew. I had come to that crossroad where that was not an option. Yeah. And I think, there are people who maybe they embark on the journey, but there also will probably come that point for them too, that they're like, this is not an option.
Yeah. And I feel that where I see a lot of unhappy people is they reach that point, but then didn't take action and just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to silently suffer for 10, 20 years until retirement, until they die, because of X, Y, Z. Want to keep the house, want to keep up the appearance, want to, get to a point where I can retire and then finally breathe. Versus,
and a lot of times people die as soon as they retire because they're so miserable, or before. So what's the point? I was like, I already almost died, so I'm not waiting around for X, Y, and Z. I'm just going to do it when I want to do it. End of story. I'm not waiting on things anymore because we don't know. We don't know if we have tomorrow, so I'm not counting on it. I'd like it to be there, but I'm not counting on it.
Well, what's next for you? Now that we're here, you wrote your book. You mentioned maybe another book.
Yeah, maybe another book down the line. But I've got the show coming up called Gloves Off, which is I'm excited about. We should be airing our first episode February 11th. So I'm super excited about that. Speaking, and I've been continuing to speak and coach. And I have an event that I'm going to be hosting, a women's retreat. Looks like it'll be in August here in San Diego, called Shakti Unbound, helping women stand in their own power, because Shakti is the Sanskrit word for power and strength. So really, again, like I was talking about the women, we're easily able to express parts of ourselves and not so easily able to express other parts of ourselves. So I'm tying that concept into the retreat, because Shakti, each Indian goddess has a Shakti. So I'm kind of tying it into that concept.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah. So, which are the Shaktis that you easily express? There's always some that you don't. And then we're going to kind of go through that process. So it's really more of a self-development journey. But just in sticking with my brand, nothing's that serious. I like to use sarcasm and I like to be a goofball. So it's still going to be a fun experience.
Awesome.
Well, that's how I operate.
I would if it wasn't a woman's, I would be there.
Well, you might be there doing the filming.
True. There you go.
So you'll be there, just not as a participant, probably.
There you go. Well, I'm so excited to be a part of your journey now, working with you and helping capture your story. And I just can't wait to see the lives that you continue to change. I mean, you've already helped so many women out there to, very much like the mentor you found along your journey, that coach. And, it's like, I wonder how different your path would have been without, sometimes there's those people that they break through all the noise, and it's really through, I feel like, hearing his story, the chakra and him, So now through hopefully, the way I see it is with this podcast, if we can help one person out there, one Kalpana early on their journey, it was worth it, because that's entire life changed.
Oh, it is. Just to even be introduced to this concept earlier. I think I just found out about it at 40. But had I been introduced to the concept of it 10 years ago, I don't know what I might have done differently. It was just all an awakening for me. And every person we impact, that's what I think it's all about. How can we impact the world and every human being in a positive way? And I feel like one woman at a time, I'd like to see, 10, 15, 20 years from now that there are more women that are like, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it. Instead of feeling a hesitation of breaking out of that box.
Well, Dr. Kalpana, or is it just Kalpana? Do people still call you Dr. Kalpana? I feel like it's
cool. Okay.
It's
either or is fine.
It's pretty cool that, it's like there's some clout in that, like still, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me in your beautiful new San Diego home.
Yes.
And,
thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
That's it for episode 2. If there is one thing that I can ask in return, if you're enjoying the show and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, it would mean the world to me, and it would help me grow the show, the platform, so we can continue getting awesome guests on and keep this train moving. I'll also go ahead and leave a description to her website as well as her socials. I definitely recommend following Kalpana. She posts incredibly inspiring content, as well as she has her own show every Sunday at 6 p.m. PST called Gloves Off. So definitely check that out if you enjoyed watching this episode and you enjoyed hanging out with Dr. Kalpana, so you could stay connected with her. I'll see you next time. And if you haven't yet, it's right there. Made it easy for you. And that's pretty good too. That was a good episode. Just saying.